Hi, everyone. This is Craig Zelzer from PCN Global, back with another episode of the Social Change Career Podcast. This is Season 12, Episode 13. Good luck. We're going to be talking about building a career at the intersection of retail and impact with Nicholas Manderfield. So for people who do not know the Social Change Career Podcast, the live stream takes place on LinkedIn and YouTube, generally lasts about 50 minutes to an hour. We greatly appreciate hearing from the community, those who are watching live. So please let us know in the comment section, particularly on LinkedIn, where you're watching from, a couple of bullet points about your work, and especially any questions, comments throughout the entire episode. For people who are listening to the podcast episode in the future, thank you for listening. This will be out usually about 2 weeks. And that's about it. The three quick requests: if you like this podcast, please check out the work of Reincorporated. Consider following Nick on LinkedIn and other channels. Please check out PCDN. And finally, we have about 140 episodes of the podcast, really featuring brilliant innovators from all over the world. I think 30 countries, from foundation heads to human rights activists to impact investors to people working in engineering for social change, and anything you can imagine. So please consider rating the podcast, and you can find it at any major podcasting platform, or if you go to PCDN Global/listen, you can also search by subject area. So that's the quick intro. So I will summarize Nick's bio and then we'll jump in. So Nick oversees Reincorporated NFP, a nonprofit retail website championing 6 unique global initiatives, including the Embera Bead Project in Colombia. I'm based in Medellin, Colombia. Nick is based here a good amount of the time. This project supports the displaced Embera indigenous community, directing funds towards Casa Embera for educational support, medical campaigns, and fair wage trade workshops. His work during the pandemic, which resulted in the donation of over 80 tons of food, underscores his commitment to making a tangible difference in communities in need. Through innovative retail strategies, Nick illustrates the profound impact of integrating business practices with a passion for social change. I will say Nick is a longtime friend, and Catalina from PCN and my wife is also on the board of Embera Project. And really what they do is amazing. And prior to Embera Project, Nick has had a very let's say impactful career in retail and food industry, and has helped manage, I think you said it's the second largest cheesecake factory in the world, or one of the largest in Chicago. And he's also a wonderful chef. So Nick, thank you so much for making time to join us. And if you could share a little bit, just how in the world, when you were thinking back to a younger age, did you aspire to work in food or hospitality? And how in the world did you get from kind of Midwest to US to working in global impact and retail in Colombia?
Well, good morning, Craig. Thank you so much for the intro. It was awesome. I started studying music. At one point in my studies, I switched over to linguistic anthropology, of all things. But while studying, I was paying for college by working in the food industry. And so I just got addicted to the food industry at that point. The pace, the people, it was a lot of fun. And so when I graduated, I figured, you know what, let's just stay in this industry for a little bit longer. Let's see what's going on and what happens. And I kept on getting promoted, and that led to over 20 years of working in food. So.
And you grew up partially a lot in Colombia, some in the US. And so can you, actually, let's just focus on food first, but also kind of your bicultural upbringing. And, I worked as a waiter. I had a short tenure as a waiter, a couple of summers, and it's really hard work. It's fascinating, but high stress. So, so a little bit about your, let's say, bicultural upbringing, but also when you started working in food services and hospitality and restaurants, were you linking it to social impact? It was just a super interesting job. And when did you, obviously a lot of people know about Chef Jose Andres, and there's lots of chefs and all types of people in the hospitality industry trying to work for social impact or combine them. But when did you find that linkage?
I grew up, so just going to the bicultural element, I grew up in Colombia. So from ages 7 through 17, I lived down here. And then at 17, I moved back to do college. At that point, I wasn't thinking social impact. I was thinking, what career do I want to do? How do I want help people. I'd seen such a difference in just quality of life and opportunities between Colombia and here that it's impossible to ignore. So it's just kind of been one of those things that my whole life I've seen and said, okay, we need to find a way to help change this. But it was never really something I thought of as a career or something I wanted to do long term. As I was getting into restaurants, my focus was I want to make money. I want to live life. Let's accumulate stuff. And it kind of got to the point where it was just, what is this for? You know, like we're kind of on this like rat wheel of everyone's trying to make more money and then everyone's spending more money. And what are we actually doing long term and how are we helping long term? And so there was a certain point my wife and we made a decision. We're like, look, we're going social impact. And that's when we both quit our jobs, started a foundation in the States and another one in Colombia. And then, you know, from there is when we started working social impact. So it was never really, I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to do this, but I've always had a passion for people. Honestly, I feel that's what brought me to restaurants at that point is I love being around people. I love chatting with people. It's just something that's been fun and very enjoyable to give people kind of like that special experience. And there's a similar thread when it comes to the social work of working with people and helping them improve. And so,
And going back just to working in restaurants, for anyone who, and we had someone recently, Nino Oduro, who worked in global development for many years. We worked at the same place, years apart, IREC. So she was on the podcast and she quit her job. And she'd been doing her startup on the side called Dine Diaspora. And the focus is really on connecting African and African-American food entrepreneurs, particularly Black women, and like helping chefs and promote culture and kind of, so she went from, let's say, international development to food and impact. And they have a huge event coming up. But when you just think about restaurants in general, for anyone who is thinking or currently working in food or, whether it's hospitality, hotels, anything, tourism, for people working in the industry, whether it's impact or not, what are some of the wonders about the industry and what are some of the challenges, whether you're a manager, an owner, a server?
The restaurant industry is very fast paced. You have to be able to kind of like think on your feet. And one of the things, so I remember at one point we were hiring in the restaurant industry. Over this summer, we had a situation we had to hire like over 200 people in a matter of a couple months. And so we were looking at doing a massive number of interviews. I think we had 8 people every day doing interviews for about 10 hours a day to hire these people. And one of the biggest things that we're always looking for during this time is that the people who can be flexible and can handle like the type of pressure that you get in restaurants, because this isn't a normal job where you can like you know what type of pressure. There's days where you walk in, things are just smooth and it's very easy. You have to be able to think on your feet very quickly. But there's days where you get there and there is just a massive rush of people. I remember looking at, let's say in the kitchen, there's times where we had like 4 pages, we had computer screens with orders on. Each page could hold probably 20 different items on it. The cooks had like 4 pages of items that they had to be cooking, and people expect food out within 30 minutes. So there is a massive pressure to be able to execute one operationally, so food, prep, orders, but then also there's a social pressure of you have to have that switch of when you're going up to a table, you have to be ready to chat, you have to be ready to make them smile. From a management standpoint, there's times you're walking into a massive issue. Someone could have spilled a glass of wine on someone, and you have to find a way to listen, find the issue, and then solve the issue, because obviously the issue is a glass of wine, but you have to solve the customer. And so there's a lot of very quick thinking on your feet moments that need to happen, and you have to be able to balance like 8 things, 10 things at one time. And for some people, that pressure is just too much. And some people think better in a singular way of like, oh, here's one thing I need to focus on right now. Restaurants are really good for people who can be able to handle multiple things at the same time and be able to kind of like, I don't know if it's really a thing, but multi-focus a bit of be able to work on multiple things at the same time.
And then an unrelated question, but are there, the show The Bear, I think it's on Hulu or whatever. And there's a fascinating movie on Netflix called Hunger, which is a Thai movie. It's one of the most interesting things I've ever seen in terms of food. But like, in terms of TV shows or any movies, like what do you think most accurately represents, the real life experience of, of working in the industry, or no show can accurately reflect what it's like?
Honestly, I think The Bear is really good at portraying some of that pressure. Not every restaurant's that way, but there is a high pressure. And I feel like anyone who's been in the industry, watching The Bear feels almost as like, I don't know, let's to use a term incorrect, kind of like flashbacks or like a restaurant PTSD. I don't know. I mean, that's probably the wrong term, but there's moments watching where I'm like, oh, like I remember this very well. That there's some massive pressure in there. So I enjoyed watching The Bear simply because of that, because it brought back those memories. So.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't watched the full, but we've watched a few episodes. It's on our list. So a couple of things, and I'm just thinking back to my restaurant. I mean, I worked in an ice cream shop. I worked in Burger King. I worked as a waiter in a resort, a very tacky resort. We did breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so just one other restaurant question, then we'll move on. They're often, and I remember this was when I was in college, and it was nice because I got to work with students, other staff from around the world. But I remember there was this image that often the manager was stressed and the cook was angry. And obviously that's a stereotype. But like in terms of, do you see a higher level of stress? Like do restaurants tend to attract people who, is it the environment? Because there is a lot of stress, particularly if it's a high volume place and you've got a turnover. But I remember particularly in this resort, which was not that classy, just like the chef always seemed angry and irritated. It might just because he was focused.
Right. So restaurants, let's just say stress is kind of like a slippery slope there a little bit. So let's just talk about operations. When you're looking at higher volume, and this doesn't apply to like 99% of the restaurants, but I remember a scenario. It was a Valentine's Day. We had a 4-hour wait in order to get into the restaurant. So the way we allowed customers to know that it was their time to get in is we gave them a pager, like a buzzer. And so just getting into like bare logistics of this, you have a buzzer and it's charging on its base. But when you give it to someone 4 hours early, by the time that it's supposed to go off, it's like lost its charge, or not necessarily the first time. But at that point, I think we had maybe like 250 buzzers. So we hand out 250 of those. After the first 4-hour wait, there's a second one, and it only had like 10 minutes to charge in between. By the second one, it's not charged. And so we start running into issues of the buzzers aren't charged. And when you have this massive number, I think at that point it was about 350 names on the wait list. The stress levels, obviously there's you have to think on your feet. So there's that moment of like, okay, like what do we do? Because we can't hand out the buzzers at the 4-hour point. And if you tell customers to come back within 2 hours to get a buzzer, then obviously we're going to lose a lot of them. And so even with that point, if you have 350 names on your wait list and you're telling people come back for a buzzer in 2 hours, how many people are actually going to be on your wait list? So how do you gauge the time that you're telling people it's going to wait? Because you tell someone 4 hours, they're going to, like, there's a good chance they're going to leave. But if it's really only going to be 3 hours, maybe they're going to stay. So when you start talking about operations in restaurants, the difficult thing is little mistakes can create massive issues. And then once you start looking at a 4-hour wait, by the time people sit down, they're not necessarily going to be happy right away. I mean, they're happy to finally be there. There's a relief to be there, but they've already put a large investment into getting to the table. So everything that's happening better go smoothly at that table at that point. But when you have that many people, there's also additional obstacles in the kitchen, additional obstacles in the prep. There's obstacles everywhere. So there is a performance piece that things have to operate correctly to avoid that stress, and little issues compound into really big issues. Because at one point, if you start getting behind, just let's say on a pasta station, the manager needs to go and visit like 30 different tables because their pastas have taken too long. Like the little things that happen because of just whatever reason can turn into mass amount of work for everyone else. And then that puts other things behind. And so this is where the stress comes into play is you have to stress about little details in order to avoid the bigger problems. But
Wonderful.
yes, there is high levels of stress in all
Yeah.
restaurants. And so.
And I put in the link to, I put in the mention to Hunger on Netflix. So it's a Thai movie, someone who basically works in a street kitchen and then gets recruited by a top chef and has a lot about class and food. So it's something, and of course the Baron Hulu.
You have to check it out.
Feel free to put and that's the English name. I don't remember the Thai name. And feel free to add your other suggestions. So just one question on careers. So, I've worked with people who, worked full-time at Starbucks or other places. And often when people are applying for jobs outside of the, let's say, restaurant hospitality industry, I have a client who worked in hospitality and sales, like, managing hotels and stuff. And what I often find when people are in the hospitality sector and they want to move somewhere else, they tend to discount their experience and just be like,
right.
I was a chef or a waiter or a salesperson. And this is curious to hear your thoughts. And often what I find is people who can reframe and say, we had a daily sales volume of X amount of dollars, or I hired people, or I increased our volume or efficiency in operations. So not so much focusing on the tasks, but like the lessons and the impact. It's such a wonderful skill set where, and obviously conflict resolution is huge. Any advice for people who either are in hospitality or just how to reframe the experience to go to, whether they want to move up in their sector or go to a more impact focused career?
I definitely wouldn't diminish it. I don't know if there's many other jobs that kind of like force you to think on your feet so quickly. Like the restaurant industry is an industry that either you love or you hate. And if you survived time there, be proud of it. I think a lot of employers look at that and understand, oh, like this person can think on their feet. And depending on what job it was, but in general, most positions are it's a mentality of like you kind of have to get your hands dirty to get things done, and you have to find a way to push through the obstacles to make it happen. And so, even when it comes down to resume, there's not necessarily the best way to bring that up. I would just have like a minimal element on the resume for it. But when it comes to interviews, the skill set of what you did in restaurants on an interview, you can easily talk them up in interviews, because then you can actually go into detail of what actually you did and the skills you gained during that time, for sure.
And so going back a little bit to what with Carissa, your partner. So you talked about you were working and getting promotions and, had a bright future potentially ahead of you, where if you had stayed either in, the Cheesecake Factory or somewhere else, or restaurant conglomerate or independent. So not to get too personal, but, a lot of people watching now or listening in the future, might have a stable career. But what are your thoughts, like, because I had the same experience, like, what are your thoughts about when you get that itch or just calling or realize, like, is this all there is? And how did you navigate that? And how long did it take you? Like, was it a 5-year process or 2 months? You're like, let's do something. And it's a pretty radical switch to quit your jobs. And obviously, Columbia very well, but like just any insights without getting too personal for others who are kind of, lots of people just need a job, but if you're fortunate to have a job and you are thinking about moving to something more to contributing to the world, like how people might navigate that process from your experience.
That's a hard switch. I mean, I can't look at, let's say, our change and say, hey, this is easy, everyone should do it. I mean, you're giving up a consistency, and I mean, we're growing up, we're always taught like, hey, you need to have a job, make sure you have a consistent income, like buy a home, get a car, and you're looking at kind of like removing a lot of these mentalities and kind of rethinking how you live life, to the point of like, do we need houses? Do we need cars? Like, what do we absolutely need in our life? And so there's an element of how much do you want it? Like, what are your priorities? It's easy to kind of to coast on life and kind of follow like some of these assigned paths, but it's very rewarding to change and to kind of like disrupt it. But I wouldn't say it's easy. comes with a lot of sacrifice. Going from like two like good incomes to at one, like we were living off of savings for a little bit, and there's moments where you just have to find a way. Like we went, I think we cut our income down to about 30% of what we're making. And so we had to like look at everything we're spending and saying, okay, how do we do less of everything? And how do we find a way to live on absolute minimal so we can begin to build something? And so at the end of the day, I'm of the mindset, just with a lot of things we do, that action creates clarity. It's easy to kind of think about stuff, and it's easy to go down the road of like, how could this work, and how can we like change stuff? You're never going to know what it's like until you try it. And once you get there, you have to be quick on your feet of being able to pivot. And so even during those times of transition, we would have at least monthly, if not weekly, moments where, as a pivot or persevere meetings, where my wife and I would just sit down and we're like, okay, what's working? What's not working? What do we continue? What do we stop? And I mean, if you're doing this with, a partner, you definitely will go through, let's like obstacles together, but at the end of the day, you'll grow stronger, assuming you make it through it. But there's definitely additional obstacles that you will face because of it. But I couldn't imagine going back to just the normal regular life. It's very rewarding if you can find a way to make it through to the other side. But there's also a moment of just let's rethink how we're living life and why we're living life and what we do at what times. Even just like what are we working towards, and what are our goals at the end of the day. And so it takes a lot of reframing, but it's definitely fun.
But is pivot or persevere something that you came up with or adopted from another source? Because I like that expression.
Oh, what book is that from? It's in. I remember. I mean, I read quite a few books, but it's from one of the books of just the pivot or persevere thing, and so we built it into just a continual. I wonder. Actually, I think that's from. What is that called? There's one that has to do with testing ideas before doing them. I'll think of it in just a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, just to say, the same thing. Like, I've gone through that multiple times, and it's terrifying, frustrating, bumpy, and obviously, I got depressed for a while when I made the change. So it is not easy, and it's funny. Just we talk to lots of clients and partners and just people all over the world. So I literally had this conversation, and we'll go too much deal with someone yesterday who has a good job and has two new job offers. And one is like very stable, pays better, and one is like super risky. And that whole thing, like, do you stay with what? And obviously, I can't tell that person what's right, but we had this whole discussion, like, do you stay in what you know and get money and security, or do you go for something that potentially could have a huge impact, but it carries so much risk and there's little security? And that is such a challenging thing.
Even diving into the element of like self-esteem. I mean, when you meet people, there's always a question of like, what do you do? And so when you're even considering like, what is my career? What am I doing? It's weird to kind of like say like, oh, I run a nonprofit. Like sometimes it's so much easier to say like, hey, I'm managing like a restaurant, or I'm doing other things. It's easier to have some of the more normal careers, but there is a process in the middle of it where it's hard on just your definition of yourself, because what we do also defines kind of who we are. But at the end of the day, I don't want to be defined by a career, and it's easy to kind of go the path of, oh, this is just what I do. I do this career, where I want to be different than a career.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, especially in Colombia, it's not as common. In the US, at least in the East Coast. In DC, it's like, that's the first question. Hi, what do you do? In Colombia, it's funny because lots of people that we talk about work, but you can spend so much time talking about other things. And some people I've known forever, I don't even know what, like, I know they do something, but it's not often this. It's also culturally specific. So in terms of when you decided to move back to Colombia, can you talk a little bit how you found I don't want to use the term product market fit, but how did you moved back, and obviously you speak perfect Spanish, you grew up here, you have family.
Yeah.
But when you came back, like, how did you decide, how did you help set up Reincorporated, and like, what was just any insights? And for people who have that kind of urge of like, they want to do something, whether it's in their own community or somewhere else, like, how do you go about kind of taking that, I want to do something, and obviously you don't want to impose on others. So like your advice for finding product market fit, or let's say, in terms of nonprofit speak, like whatever the term you want to use, like how to go about that. You didn't just move back and say, okay, we've launched Reincorporated.
Right. We wanted to use the experience we had. So coming from restaurants at that point, our first idea was to start nonprofit restaurants. And so we wanted to start a chain of nonprofit restaurants starting in Colombia. The mindset behind this was, how do we help people the most through restaurants? And so we started targeting people coming out of rehabilitation clinics. And so drug rehab, alcohol rehab. And so we would hire them out of the programs. And then the issue in Colombia is that there's already a high unemployment rate. And so if they're coming out of a rehab clinic or rehab program, there's almost zero chance of them getting a job anywhere. It's extremely difficult for them to get employment. And so they're coming out, their body is healthy. They want an opportunity to succeed, but no one gives them opportunity. And that it just creates such a high recidivism, or like a high return rate towards whatever was affecting them beforehand. And so we figured, let's work specifically with this group, because if the restaurant industry is one of those industries where if you have skills and if you have experience, it doesn't matter. Like, your history doesn't matter. Like, you can come in, and if someone's taught you how to do things properly, you can have like a promising career in that industry. So the goal was to bring people in from these programs, train them for a year. They're going to start out with zero knife skills, zero sanitation skills. And then within a year, our goal was to have a development program with them where they're working in our restaurant, they're getting paid, and they're developing all these skills so that we can help connect them with other restaurants afterwards. And so this was our mindset initially. We partnered with a friend of mine down here who had been in the industry in Colombia for over 40 years. Massive experience here. I had really good experience from the States. The issue is when you're looking at international differences in business, there's a lot of things that we think we know that we don't know. And so this is just like 101 international business is test your assumptions. So our mindset coming in is we wanted to open a restaurant in a specific area that had every type of social estrato. What's the word in English? Social class. So that we could like attract all different types of people. And so we went to an area called Junín in Medellin, opened a restaurant there. We had awesome menus, gourmet sandwiches and gourmet fries. Really cool, different concept that they didn't really have in Medellin at the time. The issue is, and this is the element of testing the assumptions, we had assumed that the term gourmet sandwich meant what it meant to us. Which is just different types of sandwiches that are well done. But in Medellin, the term gourmet sandwich, people, when they hear that, they envisioned white, like Wonder Bread and something in between the Wonder Bread. And so it's just a concept that never took up simply because of the term gourmet sandwiches. Looking back, hindsight being 2020, it would have done better if I would have called this like a hamburger restaurant. So instead of calling a pulled pork sandwich with fried onions on top of it and stuff like that, a pulled pork sandwich, if I called it a pulled pork hamburger, it would have done well in Medellin. A banh mi can be a pork belly or chicharrón hamburger. That would have done well, but the actual term gourmet sandwich just didn't click. And so this is where we had a moment where we're like, okay, we need to figure out what we need to do. We need to do a pivot or persevere. And this is where that one applied there also. And we decided to close the location we're at and move to a different location. In the process of doing that, we ran into additional obstacles. And this is where sometimes you just have to be willing to look at stuff and say, how do we change? Because most people that are successful, they're not successful because they came up with the right idea the first time. It's because they came up with an idea, they put it into action, and they tried it, and they found out what they need to change, and they found out something else they need to change, something else they need to change. And often people go through like bankruptcy multiple times to get to a point where they're successful. But I feel like we learn through failure so much better than successes sometimes. In this case, in the process of switching locations, it was just a random thing. Our partner passed away. And at that point, I was left alone with operating the restaurant, which is like an 80-hour-a-week venture in a country that I don't have my specific experience in. I have restaurant experience, but not specific Colombian restaurant experience. So we decided to pivot at that point, close a restaurant and open up a school cafeteria. And so there's been a lot of pivoting. When we opened up the school cafeteria, we were in a perfect point, and this was right at 2019 when we opened up the school cafeteria, which obviously, or actually 2020 is when we opened up the school cafeteria. So big thing in 2020 obviously is pandemic. So within the first month of opening up the school cafeteria, the pandemic hit and we closed the school cafeteria. So there was a very immediate like, oh, this isn't working right now either. So what do we do? And that's when we realized we need to find a way to help feed people, because during the pandemic in Colombia, people weren't really allowed, like kids weren't allowed to leave their home for 6 months. People were allowed to leave their house, I think it was once a week for 6 months, so they can go buy groceries that one day, and it was dependent upon the last ID on your last number on your ID. And so people weren't allowed to go to jobs, and most jobs, they weren't able to sustain the people. So they're stuck at home without an income. And it was just kind of an impossible scenario. So we decided we need to start doing some food distribution. And it was during this time that we were able to raise funds. And over those next like year and a half, we donated over 80 tons of food. We created a network with other foundations. We were verifying the need of people. Everyone would receive the food, but we found out that people would receive the food and start to sell it. So we're like, we need to switch this up. So how do we get into this and how do we verify the need? So that's what we did at that point, is found a way to verify the need through other foundations, and then kind of scaled up the distribution element through other foundations. And so we didn't start with the end mindset of doing retail. We started with the mindset of, let's start with restaurants, a normal sandwich restaurant transition to school cafeteria. And then right now we're still operating the school cafeteria. But during the pandemic, we also ran into some close friends of ours that were working with Embera people. And the Embera indigenous people, they do bead jewelry, which is what the Embera Bead Project is right now, one of our retail elements available on the website. And they were helping them sustain themselves by selling to tourists. But obviously during the pandemic, there's no tourists. No one's coming down. They had zero ways of providing income. So this is where we talked to them. We said, why don't we put it on the website and just start selling it in the States? And let's find a way to sustain them beer, and let's get some development going for them and help them kind of like get out of this rut they're in a little bit. And so we didn't come into this thinking we want to go the route of retail, but my wife has massive amounts of retail experience in her background. I have massive amount of restaurants. And so it was just kind of one of those natural things of, well, why not? What could hurt here? Let's just like test this out. And so as we got into it more, we started learning more and more about it. And I'm kind of the mindset with a lot of this stuff that, action creates clarity. As you kind of get into it, I spent so much time before with the restaurant. We wrote like a massive business plan. We went and we like pitched it to multiple people, and they told me like lots of different things to change on it. I think I spent like 8 months on the business plan just to figure it all out. This was not like a small, like, oh, let's just do this a little bit. Business plan made zero difference. Like, there was zero impact from that time on the business plan. The things that have made the difference are the stuff that we've started out and just said, let's try this out and let's see what we can do. And let's tweak things along the way. And then become masters of whatever we're doing little by little by like finding it out. And so that's how we found our niche right now with the retail stuff. Is we started with the one project. Let's put like a couple products up on the website, see how they do. They did well. Let's add some more. And then we're now at a point where we have over 350 different products on the website with like 6 different projects in multiple countries around the world. And so
amazing. Sorry, I love this story. And also, I've failed multiple times, and there is, this is more Silicon Valley. There's a glorification of failure. So I don't want to say I don't like that, but obviously learning, adapting and pivoting or persevering. And sometimes quitting is the right option. So or that could be pivoting, but sometimes it's knowing when to just be like, okay, or this is not the right path, because I've had to do that sometimes too. I mean, I helped start a nonprofit and that was my consulting or job for 7 years. And the last year three of us went full time and we were working nonstop, wrote millions of dollars worth of grants, and we didn't make it, and it was like, do I keep, like, it survived, but we didn't, like, it was like, this is not going to work. Like, we tried and it was time to do something else. But ego wise, that was really hard. But I think like sometimes quitting is a good option, or at least, I mean, so there's pivot, persevere, or pivot could be quitting, or just saying like, this is not right now. So a couple of questions. So for people who, whether they want to build a foundation, a nonprofit, they want to work for someone, and you do a lot of hiring, you've done a lot in restaurants, a lot in Reincorporated. If you think about the skills, your own skill set, or just the people that you look for in hiring, like, what do you think are the most useful skills you would say, regardless of, whether someone's doing accounting or retail, like just some things that you think are often essential for people working in impact, regardless of the sector?
So specifically, I think probably the biggest skill that's been helpful to me is recognizing or finding the things that I don't know and learning them, and having the passion to become like a master at things that I don't know. So there is like an element of just like, let's call it upskilling. Like, too often do we have people that like work for us that it's easy for them to be like, I don't know how to do it. And I'm like, well, I mean, figure out how to do it. My original career was restaurants, turned into retail, and now it's like transitioning to like marketing, and that's all with like the social impact element at the heart of it. But there's not a lot of very clear paths created. I mean, a lot of the social impact stuff is paving kind of like new paths and new careers, new ways of helping people. And it's just something that you have to be able to think on your feet. I mean, when you're just talking about starting a foundation alone, there's a certain point of starting a foundation where the founders have on like 30 different hats. And half of these hats are things that you're not used to doing, that is not necessarily in your area of expertise. And so you have to be good at being able to find out, okay, what exactly do I need to learn? How do I master this to get to the point where you are able to not only do it, but can compete properly also.
And then also doing something Colombian. I mean, all countries have bureaucracy, and Colombia has a lot of wonders, but bureaucracy is not always easy. So there's also, I mean, a friend told us before we moved here. I mean, my wife's from Colombia. I've been coming for 20 years. She said, 98% of the stuff that goes on here, you just got to let go of it. But there's like the 2%, you have to know when to, like, I don't want to say fight's the right word, but when to figure out how to correct or look for the right path. Because she said, if you fight everything, you'll go crazy. And she's from here. So, there's like, there's also, and I've started organizations in other countries too. And it's like, just sometimes it's like, it should be easy, but it's like, from my perspective, doesn't mean right. Like, it should be easy, but like I told it can't be done. It just doesn't, it's like, then trying to help navigate, rather than saying, do it my way, help to navigate. It's really interesting that doing work or organizations outside of one's home country definitely is a learning process. So can you talk, in terms of people who don't know Colombia, obviously it's a beautiful country filled with incredible, the second most biodiverse country in the world. We're hosting the COP16 biodiversity talks in Cali this year. It's a big deal.
Awesome.
Tourism's growing like crazy. But there's also, we have a legacy and still have lots of conflict and violence. So a little bit in terms of, about 5% of Colombian population is indigenous, and just a little bit like, who are the Embera people, and, and how, like, what, how are they coming to Medellin? Are they staying here? And just kind of the conditions and support they're getting, and kind of the role that you and other partners are playing in trying to work with them.
Cool. The Embera people that are in Medellin are internally displaced. So internal refugees. Most of them are coming from Chocó area. Chocó is kind of like a state in Colombia. This area is Colombia is at peace, but there still are militant groups that have, let's say, certain levels of control or interest in different areas of the country. Chocó is one of those areas. And so the reasons why the Embera leave the area in Chocó and come to Medellin are multiple reasons. Could be lack of opportunity there. Some of them are leaving because they're forced to leave because of the militant forces. We have people who show up with letters saying, you need to leave, like they'll come to us. And the difficulty is when they arrive in Medellin, not all of them speak Spanish. So in Casambera, this is the house that we work with them, and we create the products and all that there. In Casambera, we have 4 different languages at this point. So when they arrive, not all of them speak Spanish. There's numbers of them, not all of them also, but there's numbers of them that have never worn shoes their whole life. And so they're not used to walking around with shoes. And they're used to being out in nature all the time. And so there wasn't really the need for shoes. And so the reason they're here is because they're just trying to survive. They're living day to day, and they're trying to find a way for them to just get up on their feet and kind of like make it, the next 6 months, year. And they're very transitory. So a lot of times they'll come here for 3 months and they're like, look, this isn't what I want. And they'll go back for 3 months. And they're like, this isn't what I want either. And then they'll come back here. And so what our goal is to find a way to help them stand on their feet and help them be sustainable and grow. And so that's a lot of what we do in Casambera.
And what are some of the, because obviously Colombia has a huge number of internally displaced,
Yeah.
and I think it's the largest, apart from, Venezuela has a lot of externally displaced, but, what are some of the numbers in terms of, is there data showing, that, in Medellin, there's 20,000 Embera, or it's kind of more just estimates?
I mean, this changes so often, like month to month. So it's really crazy. About 6 months ago, 5 months ago, we had a massive migration where I want to say probably 80% of the Embera in Medellin migrated back out. And the government was paying for buses for them to go, and then they provided benefits for them to go back to their home. And this has happened multiple times over the last probably 5 years. And then what happens is in about 3-4 months, they start trickling back in. And so a lot of the people who have left before are starting to arrive now. And so I don't have an accurate number right now. We're not at a high point like we were, let's just call it like 7 months ago. But there's definitely, and we're not at a low point like not ready either. I don't have an exact number. I do know last year we had impact in probably about over 400 families. What we had.
And then can you talk a little bit about Casa Embera, the physical space, in terms of how many people are working there full time, how many, because you're doing health and education and training and upskilling, and also particularly Embera Bead Project, who's designing the jewelry, and, also for people listening or watching this, how do they access some, like what products, because you have about 350 products are on the website, like, is it jewelry, or are you doing other things? And, does someone have to be in the US if they want to buy it, or could they be in Europe, or just a little bit about kind of what happens in the space, and also what type of products and who's making them?
So to kind of give a full image, we will come up with designs, and so then we'll have them make the designs. We'll assign it. Last year, so one of the biggest needs for the Embera is, our goal with working with the Embera is we're targeting the needs they have. So when they arrive, their need is, I need to make 15,000 to 35,000 pesos, which is, let's just call that like $4 to like $6, $4 to $8, somewhere in there, that day to pay for their nightly rent. And so when they arrive, they're in a pure survival mode of, I need to survive today. I need money for tonight. And so the first thing we need to be able to do is be able to provide some element of stable income for them just to survive. Because this is, you can't think about like, oh, how do I take care of my family the best? How do I, change my life, when you're literally just trying to survive today? So we start out paying them on a daily basis. Then little by little, we start stretching that out to get to the point where they're getting paid on a weekly basis. And you're talking about a huge difference in mindset from daily to weekly, because once you start getting money on a weekly basis, you can start thinking about, okay, where do I shop that's going to make that's going to cost less money? How do I plan for different things? And that planning piece is such a big element of leaving that survival phase and looking at how you can actually create change in your own life. And so that's the biggest thing we do right now is creating those jobs through the sale of retail. So last year we had 25 artisans working for us for 10 months, 10 out of the 12 months. And so those would be full-time all day. We aren't able to hire them on a contract because they're so transitory. They might show up for 2 days in a row and then skip a couple days and then show up again. And so what we're working on is developing that consistency. So that's the base level. The first thing we do is creating those jobs. So then we take these products that we make, we sell them in the States specifically now. We're starting soon. We're able to, and we're just getting the ability to do it properly in Colombia right now. But those are the two countries that are doing it in the moment. But we'll take them to the States, we'll sell them there, and then we bring all the profits back here and put them into Casa Embera. So what Casa Embera does, Casa Embera helps out with children's education. Because they're so transitory, we have a lot of kids who are in school, they're in 5th grade, but actual education levels are 1st grade or 2nd grade. And so our goal is to help get them caught up with education. So at this point, we have 25 kids in our program. We have a pregnant and lactating mothers program. A lot of the Embera start having children at the ages of 13 and 14. So there's a massive element of education, nutrition, sanitation that needs to happen with mothers. And so we have a nurse on part-time that works with them. We have education for adults that is working a lot with sanitation is the biggest thing. We brought in a nutritionist last year to work with people to say, okay, how can we help them with nutrition? It's an obvious problem. The nutritionist said the nutrition isn't the issue, it's sanitation. So a lot of our big focus right now is going to be sanitation, teaching them to routinely wash their hands, clean, how to wash dishes, how to cook properly. And so a lot of the basics. And so we have all our programs. We want to have a connection from, let's call it a classroom that isn't a write it on a board, but they're doing things to learn it, and then connect that to verifying it in their home. And so we have home visits where the nurse goes and visits them one-on-one in their home to verify, hey, what are you doing? How can I help you implement these things better? Because I think the personal connection is such a big piece to this. So adult programs, the pregnant and lactating mothers programs, kids programs. We have medical campaigns that we do every other month. And this is a lot of the Embera don't like using the hospitals, partly because they don't understand the systems. They're not necessarily treated very fairly. But then also there's issues of how they take care of their kids, where the state, when they start getting into the hospitals, they feel the state's going to take their kids away. And so Casa Embera functions as a safe space. We bring doctors to them. They come and they join on the medical campaigns with us. Let's see, did I leave anything out? I think that's it for now.
Amazing. And then for people listening and, whether they're living in Colombia, US, or somewhere else, how can people engage? Obviously, donations, they can consider, it's a little bit of a pitch, but, the money goes to very good use, but they could consider buying jewelry products. Do you potentially sometimes look for volunteers, or you only take people in Colombia, or what channels should they follow you all on social media? Just to, obviously there's donate, purchase, consider supporting, amplifying, what type of support would help?
Yeah, no, definitely. Obviously purchases would help. We are currently looking for anything that would be like wholesale orders. So people who want to do something with their school, we can make bracelets that have different logos, school colors, and you can raise funds by selling our product for other projects also. And so we've had a lot of people that would do, hey, we're going to help raise money for the school. We'll buy them wholesale from Embera Bead Project and then sell them at the school at a higher rate. So the school's making money, it's supporting Embera Bead Project, and it's just a fun concept. We have something called Sponsoring Education, where for $40 a month, you are paying for the education and the whole process to have a Embera with our program, helping them get caught up on education. And then obviously donating is great. And there's something called Party in the Box, where if you want to help out, get your friends or an event, we'll send you a box of jewelry, a way to receive payment for it on your cell phone. And then you can just help get other people connected with the social change through retail. And so the unique concept of what we're doing is connecting people to social change through retail. And so it's just a fun concept to get involved in a bit.
So can you talk a little bit? So I've done a lot of work with a group called the Parent Circle Families Forum, which obviously is a joint group made up entirely of bereaved Palestinian Israeli families. And really, they've been doing this work for 25 years. There's lots of movies about them. They should get the Nobel Prize. And their mission is like, they don't want anyone else to have to join their group. Unfortunately, with what's happening in Gaza and Israel, lots of more potential members could be recruited. But can you talk a little bit, like both show it and a little bit like what this project is and how it benefits both the Parent Circle Families Forum, the people in Israel and Palestine, and also the Embera Bead Project?
So you and your wife introduced us to them, and I love their whole concept. Everything that they're doing is just awesome. What we're doing with them is we created a bracelet for them where 100% of the profits of the sale of the bracelet are being donated to them. And so here I have one on right now. It's a Morse code bracelet. I can show you a packaged version here. Oh, where's the camera? There's the camera. You can see the words. There's 3 different words. One says shalom, one says peace, one says salam. And it's all in Morse code, and it's just a cool concept. And so the goal behind this is let's use our platform, our skills, to help support other social projects also. And so we love what's been happening with them, and so it's been great. And so as we get sales, we donate the profits to them of those. And so it's been a great concept. I love their foundation.
Okay. Can you talk there? When you're thinking about just staying up to date on the broader, let's say, retail for impact community, 2 questions. One is like, where do you go? Is there a platform, a community, a newsletter, just to see like what else is happening out there? And there is the critique, I wouldn't say at the scale you're at, which is growing, but like these big corporations like buy and save the planet. It's like this whole paradox of like buying, like commercialism to buy to save the planet or help people. Like there's a fundamental paradox there. And so I don't think it applies to the work you're doing, but just where do you go for community or inspiration and that kind of contradiction of like, we can't shop our way to helping the planet.
Right. So this is very difficult to kind of like find much good info on this because there's so much, I don't know, let's call it greenwashing. It's so easy to use the term social impact when it comes down to products. And so let's just say, where has the trend been in the last 10 years? We're talking about sustainable products. And so we've been talking about how is this world friendly? How are we using products that aren't going to have longer impacts on the world long term? I think one of the transitions that's happening over the next 10 years is not only because right now sustainability in general means world friendly, but I think sustainability is going to start to also mean human friendly. And not only looking at the first level of, let's say, if I buy a shirt at whatever store, are they being human friendly in their practices and their employees, but at the multiple levels of the distribution channel. So who makes that shirt and who's making the textile that goes into that shirt? And so I feel like in the next 10 years, we're going to start looking into a lot more of this. What is really human friendly in addition to the world friendly element? And so right now, the term social impact can mean anything from we hire people somewhere, we're paying them a fair wage, which should happen no matter what we do, to stuff like what we're doing, which all the profits 100% are going to the cause. And so there's such a wide range. It's really difficult to see what the real impact is. But the crazy thing is it creates such a value. People want to see the right thing happening. People want to see change. So it's creating value on stuff. It's just very difficult right now to sort through the noise to find out the real value. So what I think is going to happen in the future, I think there's going to be ways of measuring this in the same way that we're talking about like measuring carbon footprint now. I feel there will be better ways of measuring human impact and investigating. And I think there will be jobs that'll pop up that will be the people like helping measure that. but I don't really even know the best place to find more resources on this. I feel like we're kind of paving a path that is there's a couple other groups that have started doing stuff, but there's not many doing this right now.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like if you think Mennonites, 10,000 villages, which are fair trade stores in the U.S.,
Yeah,
they, as an example, I don't, maybe they have 20 or 30 stores. I mean, there are some examples, but then there's like Tom's buy one, gift one. But then you have to
yep,
really wonder, like, is that social impact? And there, in the name of doing good, often it can do harm, or it could just, or we're going to give a 0.5% of our profit. Like, but fundamentally, I'm
yep,
not saying, but the product is destroying the planet or is being manufactured.
right.
Like, there's so many contradictions. So we're going to wrap up to two other questions. Any other general thoughts for kind of from your career path for people when someone comes to you and says, "This is so cool what you're doing," and not that they want to copy it, but just like any other cautions or encouragement just for people, whether they're mid-career or early stage, like, hey, if you're going to embark or you're already on this path, like, here's some other thoughts.
Test assumptions. So there's always an element. Let's just say, if I want to start a restaurant, my mindset is now that I've because I put so much planning into the big one. I would think the easiest and quickest way to do that now would be, why don't I just get out and just test a specific product on the street in a small stand, and let's just see people's reactions. I need to get to the point where I'm getting their reactions on something a lot quicker than what I'm doing. We spend so much time planning and so little time getting reactions, but all of our business is based on these reactions that we're getting. So how do we get to a point to get these reactions quicker? And so when you're talking about creating social change, how do we test what that actually is? And how do you, if you're talking about changing your career, how do you kind of like, is there a way to dip your pinky into the water a little bit, like without doing a full dive? How do you kind of get a little bit of taste of what it is and just see what you can do before doing it? And maybe some of that is volunteering somewhere, maybe some of that is like doing a part-time something. Who knows what that would look like? But secondly, also, I would just get active. It's We spend so much time planning sometimes, and this is where my mindset is: action creates clarity so much on so many things. Of sometimes you just need to start doing it, and then you realize, oh, that doesn't work this way. Now I need to change it this way, and you try it different this way. So get active, helping your community, helping people around you. You don't have to go find the perfect community to help. Everyone has people around them that need stuff, and so if this is really what you want to do, start finding people around you in your immediate circle to find a way to take care of, and start applying the stuff that you want to do immediately too. So
Wonderful. Yeah, it's really good. I mean, I have to say, I tend to sometimes for bigger things, I plan too long because let's just try it, and often she's right. Not always, but it's like sometimes and I'm on a friend's advisory board as a B corporation, and he launched a landing page even before he launched his company. Just found out was their interest. He got interest,
yep,
then he built like the first product. So like,
yep.
test, iterate. Last question. We talked about the bear. We talked about hunger. Any books, shows, movies, or anything that has occupied your brain in a good way? It doesn't have to have anything to do with impact or work, but just something that you've enjoyed recently.
This is the same book that I was telling you about earlier that I don't remember what it was. I'm looking it up right now. That talked about how to turn smaller ideas into bigger things and how to kind of like test them. I forgot the name of it right now.
If you send it to me later, we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, for sure. Let's do that.
So
Mind blank.
Thank you so much for generously sharing your time and wisdom and experience. And, it was wonderful. And for people listening in the future, please check out the Reincorporated, the Embera Bead Project. Follow Nicholas Manderfield on LinkedIn. If you, check out the products and share with others. And, the example we talked about with the parent circle. If you have an organization or a community project, like get in touch with them to explore if you want to do something that benefits both of you. Obviously look up and learn about what's going on in Colombia, both the good and the challenges. There's a lot of good things and a lot of challenges. and stay tuned for lots of future episodes. And again, please, if you like the episode, or even if you don't like it, which I think you will, please consider rating and sharing the podcast. It helps grow our impact. And thank you so much, Nick, for all the amazing work you and Carissa and the team are doing.
Thank you, Craig. This was fun.
Okay, I'm going to hit end here.